it's so good having you. Go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone.
Yeah, hi, I'm Allison Mankowski. I'm a registered dietitian working primarily with athletes with eating disorders in the Ann Arbor, Metro Detroit area. And I'm really happy to be here and chat with you about that.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I'm really excited to chat on. Also, I really love some of your perspective too from the athletes, with working with athletes. I think that would be really helpful for people and not something we really touched on too much with someone's recovery story. So what I like to start with is and what I would like this conversation to center around is what is the thing that has helped you the most in your recovery, something looking back on your recovery as a big takeaway that helps you progress or turn a corner or, that big thing that stands out?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two facets in my recovery, and like I said, I come from an athlete background. I've been an athlete my whole life. I continue to be an athlete. And so I think that is kind of a unique situation, not an uncommon situation. Obviously,
Yeah.
there's a pretty wide range of athletes who struggle with, all sorts of facets of eating disorders and disordered eating. And I think that was one of the biggest, even though it, obviously was some of the, beginning factors of the development of my eating disorder and disordered eating patterns. I think that was one of the biggest things that actually pulled me out of it too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was it started with a desire to be better for my sport, and in high school I was a cheerleader and ran track, and then went on to cheer in college as well. And I think kind of throughout high school and college, had different struggles around, especially cheerleading and body image and wanting to kind of look the part of a cheerleader and be light and be able to, do everything. But then kind of as I learned more about nutrition and as I started to kind of delve into it, realizing that actually, my behaviors were harming my performance and leading me to not be the, best athlete I could be. And so really kind of latching on to, through those initial stages of recovery and, all the self-doubt of like, should I do this? Should I recover? But really holding on to, I'm doing this because I want to perform better. And I'm doing this because I want to, be able to fuel my body the way that it needs to be fueled. I want to not cause damage to my body so that, I can continue to do the things that I love. And so that was really the biggest piece that, kind of pulled me through some of those tough spots, and, really using that. And then, the second piece of it is as I started to learn more about nutrition and, kind of last minute in my college career decided that nutrition was something I wanted to actually pursue as a career. I think that was the other piece that really kind of helped me along my journey, as well as, the more I learned about it. And obviously having a personal interest in eating disorders and continuing to learn more from the scientific side of things. I'm a very science-minded person, and I think the more knowledge, knowledge can be a good thing and a bad thing in eating disorders. But I think for me, the more that I learned and the more that I kind of dove into the, educational side of it, that kind of helped me as well. And realizing, once you get the science behind things, that gives you that little extra push of, yes, I am doing the right thing, in that sense as well.
Definitely, because you can't argue with the science, as much
Yep.
as you try. And I think that's a really powerful tool in people's recovery. There are so many questions I wrote down just with what you brought up, specifically just because I want to it'd be great for people to hear some of the side of things with being an athlete. So I have a lot of questions. So I'll just look through here in
Yeah.
no particular order. So you said that, so being an athlete, I've come across this with many people, but being an athlete pulled you out of it, while it also, aided in the disorder tendencies. But it's hard to decipher between what is a way to properly take care of myself around athletics
Mm-hmm.
and food in my body versus, the eating disorder, and like sorting through those things. what helped you to sort through that? Like what, if that makes sense, like what helped you to do that?
Yeah. And I think that's one piece where, I think I distinctly remember taking my first nutrition class in college. And I think that was kind of the first time. And there was sections on, I was an exercise science major. So there were
Yeah.
sections on exercise science and what was important for the body and how the body functioned. And I think that was kind of the first piece that, rather than listening to my teammates or rather than reading blogs online or whatever it might be, it was like getting those actual calculations and numbers of this is what an athlete needs and this is what happens if they don't get it. That was really the like turning point for me of like, okay, yeah, the stuff that I'm doing here is not contributing in the long run. And that was kind of the switch for me that flipped of, okay, no, I do want to learn more about this and I do want to focus on performance nutrition and rather than going down the other path, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine it was really confusing trying to figure out, like, you just want to be the best athlete you can be, and then also having all these expectations and of
Mm-hmm.
yourself and them being put on you to kind of understand what was the right route to go. So yeah, that appropriate and correct nutrition advice of like, yeah, we need to consistently fuel our body and with adequate amounts of food, which is really scary. So even with, this is a question I ask everyone, uh, but even having that information, that is still brings up, I'm sure, scary things of like, okay, well, that means I need to be less restrictive in X,
Mm-hmm.
Y, and Z, which means that brings up fears around body image and what have you. So how did you, so it's just being given like this uncomfortable thing you have to go through, knowing that on the other side is where you want to be. What helped you through that?
Yeah. And I think a really big piece of that is finding your support network, right? And learning people in your life that may be, triggering to eating disorder behaviors, and learning people that are going to be positive influences and kind of help you through that. Because you're absolutely right. That just having the knowledge isn't enough to make that full change and full turnaround. And being in an environment where I certainly was not the only person on my team that was struggling with stuff, learning to navigate that and learning to focus on the couple friends that I did have who, I could sit down and say, here's the things that I'm struggling with and I don't want to do this anymore. And leaning on them and being able to kind of recognize and tune out. And, obviously they're your teammates. I can't like get away from them necessarily, but,
Yeah.
Being able to at least recognize and acknowledge these people are, not the ones that I'm going to be trying to, surround myself with in these harder times. And I'm going to focus more on friends and other, support figures. Whether that is a professional team or whether it's just your social support or your family or whoever it might be, but being able to find that support team to really lean on when you are, kind of doubting and struggling with some of that.
Yeah, I hear that often, just of how much it has shaped athletes' recovery with who they surround themselves with. And I imagine that is hard in the, like, with your teams and in the athletic realm of, you're surrounded by disordered eating is just very common, and of course it is, because we're being told all of this, we have all this information coming at us, this false information. So I imagine that would be really hard to like to yeah, to navigate and to, so I have found that people said that's very successful and very helpful. Anything else that helped you that
Yeah.
stands out?
The one other thing as you were kind of sitting there or as you were talking, the other big thing that came to mind is, and I didn't recognize this at the time, but, I don't think I could have or would have been able to fully recover being in that environment.
Yeah.
And not just because of the people, but because of the pressures I put on myself and just the nature of it, and the way that it, manifested for me. I don't think it was until I found other interests. So, years down the road after college, I got more involved in weightlifting and CrossFit and doing a completely different form of exercise. And I think that has been a really, really powerful piece for me, because rather than, and not saying that cheerleading couldn't do this for some people,
Right.
but rather than focusing on what my body looked like and how my uniform fit or whatever it might be, I learned to really focus on what can my body do, and I want to be stronger, and I want to be able to get faster times in this, workout, and I want to be able to lift heavier and put more weight on the bar, and finding that outlet that was more supportive of recovery. And the last decade of exploring that, I think has, not that I was, not that I wasn't at least partially recovered, but I think that is where the kind of final step of everything was kind of
Yeah.
learning to re-evaluate what I wanted my body for, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's a last step for a lot of people in recovery of like, okay, what do I want? What do I
Hmm.
like truly want? Um, and it sounds like too, you have changed your focus, like your focus kind of, and this could be wrong, but I mean, this is very common of like changing your focus on your intentions behind the movement and your
Hmm.
athletics. How has that changed?
Yeah, and I think I'm always, at least I hope, I don't see a world in which I am not doing athletic things. Hopefully, I'm able to continue doing that because that's a huge part of who I am, and I enjoy it, and it brings me joy and happiness. But again, doing it as, with a different intention, doing it because it makes me happy, doing it because it makes me feel good, doing it because, it is my, outlet for all of the other day-to-day stressors, and, finding um, a new goal, I guess. And I think that that's a really important piece with all of this. And, um, I think some of the big things that helped make that change, I mean, um, obviously I'm not going to be a college cheerleader forever, as as fun and great as that was. That's not an option long term, um but learning to shift my priorities as well, and having a priority to my family and as a priority to my career, and that movement can fit into that, but it doesn't need to be the primary aspect of what I'm doing, and I think that's the other kind of piece of all of it.
Yeah, which makes it, it makes sense to, it's hard to navigate because these things don't exist alone. To navigate your relationship with exercise and forming a new healthy relationship with exercise when having a unhealthy relationship with exercise, going
Mhm.
from, it doesn't happen overnight. So it's super complex. And it sounds like one thing you're saying that aids in that is, so like who you're surrounding yourself with and knowing those boundaries and knowing what is um, more supportive of your recovery, but also like being able to, it sounds like you were able to step away, whether it's like a forced step away or an intentional step away, but you were able to step away and gain like a little bit of perspective and maybe some more
Mhm.
trust around it. And I
Yeah.
think that's something like that should be in, like, is a good thing to encourage of, taking a break from what exercise you're doing or the routines you have, or
Yeah.
taking a break just to kind of be able to think with a different perspective or gain some clarity around it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the topic of exercise in recovery is a pretty contested topic across the board, and
Yep.
sports and continuing in athletics in recovery it's there's some pretty varied views in that.
Yes, there.
Obviously, I'm coming from a perspective of someone who works with a lot, I would say a vast majority of my practice is athletes.
Yeah.
And so I think it's something that, I have maybe towards one end of the spectrum, in that I understand the importance of athletics. And for me, it was a really powerful tool, right? Done in a safe way. And, obviously there's a lot of caveats, and it's not, it's very individualized, but I think it's really important, like you said, to be able to explore those, avenues of, is exercise appropriate, and is exercise helping or hurting, and to kind of open those dialogues, which sometimes I feel like get kind of shut off before you're able to actually, have that conversation, and kind of explore some of those avenues. And I think it can be a powerful tool when it's, done in the right way, and can help in the long run, to, to learn and get some insight into that.
Yes, I agree. Like, it's not black and white, and we also don't want to close the door to having those important conversations about that. I very much agree. Yeah, I think it's just your relationship with exercise as your relationship with your body and food and your recovery is just super complex, and we can't like really put them into boxes and make these like blanket statements. And I'm curious, with just going into the kind of complex and changing nature of like how exercise and recovery is changing, and is, it just, things come up that you don't really expect to, and you can't really anticipate what it's going to look like. And I'm curious for you, with your relationship with exercise and your recovery, have you noticed, like, what have you noticed about what you like about exercise, or maybe the types of exercise you like, just like within intuitive eating and coming from a restricted mentality, you notice, I don't really like that thing, or I like this thing.
Yep.
What have you been able to take away? Because I think it's really scary for people, but on the other side of things, and being recovered and having a good relationship with exercise, what have you, I think it'd be a good thing to like leave people with what you've gained through that you might not have thought you would have gained.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things, and I think this is really common, is, on top of cheerleading in college, I ran, because that's what you did when you are trying to do extra exercise, right? You go for a run and you push yourself as hard as you can. And, I think that's pretty common.
Yeah.
And I hated running. I ran track, but I was a sprinter, and anything over 100 meters was like pushing the limit, right?
Yeah.
And so, in college, I would push myself to run, miles, and I just was miserable all the time and hated it. And I, actually after college ran a couple of half marathons, and like just didn't really love it, but it was something extra to do when I wasn't doing sports anymore, because it's the only thing I knew. And then I took about an 8-year break and didn't really run, and pursued other things, and was like, I really enjoy doing these other things, and this is way better than running, and I don't have to run. There are other options out there. And so being able to explore that was great. And then about a couple, like two or 3 years ago, actually I've run 3 half marathons in the last, couple of years, and loved it. And it was great, and it was enjoyable, and it was something new and exciting, and it didn't feel like punishment anymore.
Right.
And so I think that, is just one example of like, once you're able to kind of rework that, feeling towards a certain exercise, or the reason you're doing